So now we're live.
Yeah, except one sec here. I lost
Just a bit of a freeze.
my image. So thank you, everybody. We are live. And can you hear me though?
Yes.
Oh, geez. Right as soon as we go live, I get this. God darn it. Jeez. All right. Thank you, everybody, for putting up with this. We'll hopefully make it worth your while here. Why can I not see anything? All right, there we go. Okay, thank you, everybody. But yeah, I hit the live button, and then I lost the page. But anyway, we're good now. So thank you, everybody, for watching. And here we're with Nathan with the YouTube channel Spiritual Level of Being. And thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Glad to be here. So I thought we'll just dive in. As you know, recently I did my own translation of the Greek Gospel of Thomas using a translator and also looking up individual words and seeing what their meaning was. And I come across the word petenios, which is where they would say to the birds of the sky, where Jesus says, if those who say to you heaven is in the sky, the birds will get there first, basically. Well, petenios could mean bird, but it also means rooster. And rooster is very symbolic. It means Christ. It also means dying and rising from light to day, the resurrection. And it's also the Hebrew word for man. So a man could be placed for a sacrifice. A rooster could place in the sacrifice in order to take a punishment for a man instead, which is very, very interesting. But also with the rooster being with Christ, as you mentioned before, having a little chat with the rooster leading the chicklings, which is also very interesting. But I love the Gospel of Thomas because it was possibly written as early as 40 AD to 60 AD and maybe even as late as 250 AD. Some believe it's the historical words of Jesus, many do. Some believe it was a gathering of someone's list of memory quotes that he heard in church or an outside preacher. Many different stories. I, for one, believe that other Gospels copied from the Gospel of Thomas, as there's many similar sayings, but I see it more as an uncensored, unedited list of the quotes of Jesus.
Yeah, there's a lot to go off of there. I think they say, just like with dating a lot of things, that if you like the Gospel of Thomas, you tend to date it early. And if you don't like it, it's late. So, I mean, maybe I'm biased then, because I'm more inclined to date it early than late. And some people say that they see reference to the fall of the Second Temple in the Gospel of Thomas, which I really don't. I forget which logion it is, but I've read that and I'm like, I don't know. Like in textual criticism, we tend to think everything in the New Testament is really talking about the fall of the Second Temple, which
wasn't so much the focus on the Gospel of Thomas. It's very symbolic. Even with the Thomas, there's no historical evidence for Thomas being Jesus' brother. It's possible that this is the disciple Thomas, or it's a secret name for Jesus' brother Jude. I am one for it being symbolic, for you being like Christ, that you act so much like Jesus that you are his twin. So your divine double, so your higher self, your ascended Christ, your guardian angel. So that's my take on it, being very symbolic.
Yeah, and his full name is Thomas Judas Didymus Thomas, isn't it?
Yes, and that's very symbolic too. Like Judas meaning zealot as well, also meaning righteous, but it can also be with Didymus, can mean testicles, testes, and that can be also symbolic with the sperm, the seed of life, the serpent, which is also associated with Christ, and the rooster. And Thomas being Hebrew for twin, and Didymus can also mean twin as well. So again, with your divine double, your divine higher self, your inner Christ. So you too being like Christ, you too being like Jesus, discovering the spirit within is like discovering Christ. So finding your inner God.
Yeah, and Carl here in the chat has already brought up Abraxas, right? From
with the rooster.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the serpent.
Yes.
Yeah, which that's a big mystery for me. What's going on with Abraxas? Um, yeah, and you wonder if that soldier part of Abraxas isn't the cleansing of the temple, right? That
Hmm. Also,
with
the divine armor of God, so God's protection as well,
yeah,
symbolic for many different things. The serpent being Christ, the serpent stone or pole, sorry, being mentioned when Yahweh releases the poisonous snakes on the people and orders them to construct the serpent pole, and who looks in that lives. The rooster
yeah,
also being symbolic for Christ, light and dying, but some portray even have a dove's head or a fox's head even, and that can also
ah,
be reflected with the divine femme, divine masculine, etc. So concept of God being androgynous, and also with the humans, the animals, and this portrait making up a Braxis, I also view it as being God is all life itself. So all around us and within us. That's also symbolic in my partake, what I get from it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just when there's little information to go on, you can kind of connect everything and say, well, it could be this, it could be that.
Hmm.
And it's interesting how, they all kind of work together, but unfortunately, we don't have anything definitive.
Hmm.
Um,
Also, when you mention the
yeah,
temple, I find it
yeah,
more with the Gospel of Thomas warning one to be wary of the religious establishment and political establishments when he says about the warning about the Pharisees. And you also find this in Luke 11:52, saying, woe to the Pharisees for their hidden knowledge. And in Greek, that's gnosis. So you can find that even in the New Testament, which to me also I believe is why they copied from the Gospel of Thomas in other texts. If not, certainly was inspired by some of it. I don't just view it as Gospel of Thomas they copied from. I view it from other works such as the Mandaeans, the Ebionites, Nazareans, etc. All these
mhm.
different communities coming in together, and yeah,
Yeah, along those lines, I've heard the idea. I haven't checked into it at all, but they have like the various characters in the Gospels that we have, and in their current form, are a little bit on the later side, where they say that the oral traditions came sooner, right? And they have Thomas, and the parts that talk about Thomas, they have him saying things that would seemingly come out of the Gospel of Thomas. So they're kind of incorporating the different Gospels into our current Gospel, like the canon tradition,
yeah.
which I haven't looked into that, but that's an interesting idea. How it kind of, or I
Also, I
mean,
like what you mentioned
yeah,
before with the Gospel of Thomas being made earlier. I also support this theory as there were church fathers complaining about it, and that's before 250 AD. So, and also afterwards as well. And how we
yeah,
were mentioning before about some nonsense about how the Borborites were said to drink semen amongst their communion wine, as apparently Church Father Bishop Ephanius, who was also the dude who wrote the biography of Constantine, the emperor, the first Christian emperor of Rome. He was very anti-Gnostic. And he writes that apparently Jesus pulls a woman out of his side, similar to God with Adam and Eve pulling Eve out of Adam's rib, and then Jesus has sex with her and then drinks his own semen. And Mary Magdalene sees this and she's shocked, and he says that we all must do this to live, and so this is why the Bobberites drink semen and sperm. But it's absolute church nonsense. They were also calling
yeah,
them baby eaters, which is ironic because early Christians were called baby eaters by the Romans. So it's a case of
yeah,
victims becoming abusers.
yeah, yeah, and with that whole polemical thing, where they talk about how Mark, when it was written, and like all the gospels, that they were written to preach well, right? So you could say them from the pulpit as you're reading. That polemical story, I don't know if that would preach well. Like if you're like saying that story, do you get the warm and fuzzies as you're leaving, after hearing a sermon on that? I don't know if you would, but
Well, if
it
you
just
see all
strikes
these
me as,
texts, it shows that the Bible itself was never meant to be owned by the masses. You have the Old Testament in Hebrew, and then you have the New Testament in Greek. And they used to think it was Aramaic, but a lot of modern day scholars all point towards the Greek copies first, and only a slight few text of the sayings of Jesus were taken from Aramaic sources. So it's mostly in
yeah,
Greek. And Marcion's canon, the first Christian Bible put
yeah,
together, was written in Greek. And this also supports this. So it's so much like BS that's been told to us, especially throughout history, like his story, not her story as well, especially with all the persecutions of females throughout history. And many females were leaders of the ancient Christian movements, and we find them being praised in the Gnostic
Mhm.
movements, and we also find the hints of the male-dominated societies disliking this.
Yeah, and it kind of, I wouldn't even know where to begin with, assessing that, but with the whole later idea of, people say it's an interpolation from First Corinthians about women don't stay quiet in the church, right? That if that was the view, right, that Paul took, and he's pretty early, that the tradition of women being the first to the tomb and Mary Magdalene, that with the critical textual concept of the more difficult passage is the earlier, that would put the female leadership deal pretty early, right? As in, like, this doesn't really jive with the text of, well, I don't know, if we're taking that passage of women stay silent in the church, if we're saying that is actually the straightforward reading, like it's anti-woman, which I'm not sure it is. I don't know. It just seems weird to me. I'm not saying it's interpolation, but I don't think what we would.
It could even be a weird way of honoring them, that they're silent amongst the rabble. All sorts of different ways of one.
Yeah,
how they interpret it.
Yeah, and I've heard legit scholars, like top New Testament scholars, say, no, that's just a thing that we shouldn't have drama or gossip in the church. But I don't take that. But I don't have a PhD in it either, so I'll just let them. We'll just say that's probably how it is.
I lean more the anti-female, but there's also rejected text from Paul and even his I forgot her name, Thracia or Thesia. She was a female follower of Paul, and she had her own gospel as well, and that was also rejected. So this kind of, it shows that Paul was definitely edited. We know now a lot of his writings weren't written by him, and they were just edited and had his name slapped on as well. Like the case of the Gospels, they weren't written by any of the actual people. They were written by other people that slapped their name on it. And the only reason we have 4 Gospels now is because Saint Irenaeus, a church father, also a heresy hunter, wrote the book Against Heresies, complaining against other Gnostics. And because he says so, there's only 4. So again, it shows that it wasn't meant to be owned by the masses, which is interesting. And when we go into anti-female, the saint you mentioned before about the end saying of 114 of the Gospel of Thomas, I'll read it out. It goes, Simon Peter said to them, Mary should leave us, for females are not worthy of life. Jesus said, look, I shall guide her to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit, resembling you males. For every female who makes herself male will enter heaven's kingdom. To me, that I have different symbolic views of that. One, I also see that as if he impregnates her, that if she carries a male child, then herself is beyond sex, that she carries both the masculine and femme. I also view it as some Gnostics believe that the male soul was female and that female soul were male, which could be this as well. It's hard to say. Some ancient Jews believed all souls are female as well, and so did some Gnostics. It's interesting when you see this. So I definitely see this as very symbolic, and the other followers of Jesus being all different communities, a range of zealots, Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, and Cainites, etc., even Greeks and Zoroastrians. So I see all these different concepts being mixed in and influenced, especially with its symbolic reference. It shows that Jesus had a very different mind, and he's got all these different groups following them, especially if other Jews would consider them complete outsiders. Even the Essenes themselves, they had several different infactions of them. You even had Cainite Essene groups that believed that Jesus was Yahweh and his God was El. Some Essenes believed this too, multiple different varieties of Essenes. And some would become the Ebionites and the Nazarene, the Jewish Christians, and carry on their traditions of adoptionism, believing Jesus was adopted by God. And even the Gnostic sense of the virgin birth, it's all souls are born of a virgin, but the body is born from flesh. And I reckon that's sort of what carried on into the so-called virgin birth story. All that interpretation.
All that is very interesting. The soul is born of a virgin, but we're all born of flesh. That's an interesting idea of the virgin birth story.
Yeah.
And just as you were talking, it occurred to me, just like you had said that the Gnostic belief that all souls are female, right? And and if we think of that, well, then what does it mean to be a man if all we've ever seen is female, right?
Yeah.
Then
Well, it
nobody's
depends
been a
on the
man.
view
We
of
don't know what that
Gnosticism.
is. What's that?
It depends on the view of Gnosticism. Some viewed as masculine souls, some also viewed as the feminine souls, and some viewed it as full androgynous, so not having a sex, which I'm more for that view, like soul not having anything. It's basically our mind, like what we see is here. I also go for the concept that's all in our head, so yeah, which a lot of Gnostics were. They also used logic and reason. There was a lot of Stoicism as well mixed in with Gnosticism, so with philosophy of its time. They were big on science, astrology. It was big on their sermons. Like we can read multiple different texts that we can see hidden rituals encoded in there as well. I think it was the 8th and 9th, one of the texts was. It's all in the Nag Hammadi, you can read it. So.
Yeah, where you wonder, like, I kind of wonder if, let's say it's coming at it with a Pythagorean idea, where the monad is one, and then there's the dyad, which is two, which is one is essentially masculine, two is essentially feminine, and then three is creation. Hopefully I'm expressing it correctly, right?
100%.
That if we're going to be made male and everyone is female, right? Then that's like a reference to theurgy, that we're kind of ascending back to the forms, right? We're being closer to God. Maybe that's I don't know. I'm probably reading way too heavily into it, but yeah, you think. Part of me also wonders if it's not how throughout the Gospels the disciples are always just never getting it. I forget what the term is for that. Apostolic. They don't understand anything, right? Like where they say, "Oh, you have to be born again," and he says, "Well, what? I'm an adult. How am I going to get back into my mother's womb?" And then they're like, "No, no, no. What are you doing? Come on." Where this is kind of saying, "All right, I'm going to make her a man just like you, and then she's going to be just as dense as all of you guys, right? So then you'll be happy." I don't know. That's one of my takes on Logion.
Well, one of those things that you just mentioned is great, actually, by the way, because there were church fathers that had a huge problem with many Christians taking the Bible too literally, not seeing its symbolic sense and its deeper meanings as well, which again would be very Gnostic. So that's one reason why it was sort of leaned into take it literally in the end afterwards. But it's quite ironic. It's one reason it wasn't allowed to the masses because they were all taking it literally. It's even with the stories of the Greek legends where some would take it all literally and some believed it was symbolic and some didn't believe it at all, as regarded as stories. And this is even in ancient Greece. So it's the same thing going on in all religions here. Like with Gnosis, everyone's Gnosis or understanding of Gnosis is different. So everyone's understanding of spiritual knowledge is within you.
Yeah. Which kind of taking a whole bunch of what you had said, with, taking it literally, there was a part in Timaeus where Socrates says, well, this has the form of a myth, right? Where this probably didn't really happen. This is probably just myth. And so they have it in the Platonic scriptures, they have it expressly, don't take this literally, right? And regarding the Greek being the original, right, for the Old Testament, which is a strange idea, right? But
there's also Old Testament theory too. New Testament is the Greek one. I'm pretty sure the Old Testament was originally in Hebrew or then compiled together in Greece. There's all different theories of that, isn't there? Yeah.
Well, crazy, some people say, and it's probably not the prevailing view, it's kind of outside my purview, but I've heard it said that some people speculate that the Septuagint is the original version, and then it was made into Hebrew, which you wonder. And
it could be possible because there were Greek-speaking Jews as well that sort of mixed in with Greek culture around that time, which is very interesting, trying to be more of a Hellenistic form of Judaism, which I believe was the Pharisees were more leaning towards that idea. And the Sadducees didn't really like that, I believe, unless it was Sadducees. I know Sadducees didn't really like the Pharisees because they also viewed them as influenced by Zoroastrianism as well. So it very well could be compiled in Greek first, which is interesting, as they were very learned of the time. That's what they were considered as, the knowledge and writers of the time. They had their libraries, so it wouldn't surprise me. I would view it being completely formed in Greek first. I would accept that, and just little references of it being separate, being in Aramaic or Hebrew. Similar to Christianity, just being compiled in together later.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of all religions. They're all syncretistic, really. Like they're all compilations where, like
there was no Bible in Jesus' time. They were all arguing over which text was right and whose God was correct.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Which, I wonder about, like, I had mentioned Timaeus, where you wonder if with Genesis, where I see Timaeus and Genesis being very similar, it could all just be coincidence, but there's so many similarities, right? A big one is Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, where there's that abrupt shift, right, from creating the cosmos to creating the earth, right? The same thing happens in Timaeus, and they specifically call it out, where they say, and now we're going to change this story entirely. I don't think they say that. Take a wildly different approach to the story now, and we're going to tell this, right? Whereas in Genesis, they just kind of keep going. And just like there's an author, Russell Gomirkin, he points this out, that there's so many similarities that you wonder either Genesis is borrowing from Timaeus or Timaeus from Genesis. That it would seem weird for Genesis to borrow from Timaeus, but maybe. That seems the most likely because Genesis seems to be the original. But yeah, you wonder what's going on. Which one was the first, and did they just come to this?
Especially if it was translated in Greek, it'd be a world of mess because the word cosmos can also mean the universe. It can mean the whole earth, the world. And, crazy meanings. Especially if you went into the Logos, you could probably get 6 pages full of it in ancient Greek. So it's just, because there's thousands of years of evolution of its language involved compared to us with English. It's a few hundred. It's like the letter J didn't exist until the 1500s. It wasn't fluently used in our language until the 1600s. So before that, we were saying S-use for Jesus, which is interesting as well. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I'd like to know what logos means. Like, it's just like
everybody's multiple. Everyone's got their own interpretations of it. Yeah, there's one I heard as well that was recently today. I forgot to write it down. I just got to remember. I think it was love and truth was another meaning of it as well. I just heard that one. Otherwise, I've heard of Christ, the divine being, all sorts of mixture of different things of it. So yeah, I want to go into it eventually. I'll have to take a whole bunch of notes so I can go in a whole bunch of different meanings, not just my own theories and shit.
Yeah, a lot of people have said it's Stoic. The Stoics were into logos, and there's the whole culture of Philo, not necessarily Philo's ideas specifically, but there's the whole Hellenistic Judaism had their own concept of the logos. Yeah,
it's even like Christ as well. There's heaps of different meanings of Christ as well, and the different takes of understanding him or understanding the symbolic meaning of Christ. Some view it as a divine spirit, some link it as just Jesus, some link it as a Messiah. It's so many interpretations. Even the Messiah itself in ancient Judaism, you didn't even have to be Jewish. Like Cyrus the Great, a Zoroastrian Persian king, was called the Messiah as well. And several different Jews, especially Essenes, were anointing their own messiahs. So it's crazy. So it was anyone that helped the Jewish people or who had a greater understanding of God, or the text.
Yeah. I've heard the idea of, they didn't have capital letters back then, is my understanding, but it's almost as if like there's a lowercase Messiah and an uppercase Messiah, that there's like the Messiah, but then there's also lowercase Messiahs, right?
Yeah. So you've got like the messenger and the one that brings it in, or a warlike and peaceful Messiah as well, and all that sort of stuff. Some viewed it as barbarous and Jesus as well, and some viewed it as the dude who was let go, was meant to be the Christ and the the false Christ was executed and it's got mistranslated. I'm not really one for that view, but something I've just heard. And there's others that viewed that basically Jesus was sacrificed to bring peace and Barbara was there to bring war and all sorts of stuff, because they both sort of mean Jesus as well. But honestly, like, I'll take a lot of that story with a grain of salt, as I view the Romans would just view them as an anti-political mess of things, because they didn't understand ancient Judaism was diverse. All they knew that Yahweh was a war god. So they would say, yep, worship's a war god. He's got followers. Some of them are armed. Execute. You know, that's how it would have been. You know, but when you read some of the Greek text, the word antidote is mentioned, and it goes into that could be Thessaloniki oil, which can also be linked into a dying and rising of kings. It can knock someone out, basically, and they can rise again, make them appear dead, which is very bloody interesting. You know, even the drink that was given to Jesus, myrrh, that he rejects, that could be a sex drug, as you couldn't make sex drugs without it back then. It was potent. If you look it up on Google, even, it will say that was used as a stimulant, so it gives you more of a hard on, basically, increases your sex drive, so you can perform longer. They had sex drugs so strong back then, they could kill you basically with it. So, yeah,
it was sour wine, right? And he was also offered something else.
It said oxos as well, which could be sour wine. It could be a psychedelic wine. It could be vinegar as well. All different translations. But when it goes into oxos, that points towards the bittery substance being Thessaloniki oil, or mixed in with hyssop, which was a thing. But it seems like these Greek translators could have also mixed some of their drugs in, but because the Jews were mostly, they did use some of these other drugs, don't get me wrong. They were more known for acacia and cannabis, cannabosum and frankincense and myrrh, and they would use it for healing properties. But that being said, that's why I reckon Jesus rejected it, because he had been fluently educated in what would have been medicine, what was holy, divine. He would have seen what they would have been giving him. That explains why he's like, no, I don't want that. So they were trying to give him a hard on. Reason why I think that is because if you go into scenes with Jesus releasing the doves can also mean temple prostitutes, temple priestess, so Pelicides in Greek. I butchered that word, Palladices, whatever. But it also means temple prostitute, temple priestesses. So symbolic. So he wasn't just releasing doves. You don't just get killed for releasing pigeons. Those prostitutes that were following him were victims of the sex trade that he took. Because what they would do is they would raise young girls there. There's a text of Mary, a virgin, being raised at the temple as well to a certain age until she was married. So guaranteed a virgin. So not the same as a Greek temple prostitute. Very, very different. So they weren't quite prostitutes. They were more like raised to be bridal grooms. But they were often given drugs to produce visions. One of them would then carry on the Son of God, the Messiah, basically. So that's what they were doing it for. And the young boys were raised there as well to be brought up into rabbis and then groom the next lot of children. That's why you got Jesus in here going and saying lestus, which could also mean thieves, predator, and also rebel as well, which is interesting. So the word grotto being grotesque. So he's calling he says, this is a temple, a house of prayer. Everyone's welcome. You've turned it into a disgusting place, you predators. And that's why he bans the stuff being taken through the temple courtyards. So children are shouting at him, praise the Messiah, praise be Son of David. Why are children in the temple praising him unless he's freed them? So certain stuff like that. And that's because of very Canaanite beliefs were carried on in ancient Judaism with the worship of Yahweh, which was a Canaanite storm and war god, and was big on sacrificing, because people could sacrifice their child at the temple if they couldn't afford an offering, which is a lot of people ignore. You know, it's crazy. So you have a very different view here of Jesus when you look at stuff. That's why I also see him being one for the children. And when you mentioned finding the innocence within, which you also find in the Gospel of Thomas, that's why I see his teachings being very unique, and why he had all these outsiders following him, and why some of the disciples didn't like him having children come up to him, basically, as well, because they viewed it's more for the adults, that they're the ones that are worthy. But he's saying everyone's worthy. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole lot there. I've not, that's like if you're like if we're playing like an arcade game, that's like the biggest what's the term, parallelomania combo, right? But and I mean that nicely, but yeah, that's like when you're translating, words can mean so many things, and you can take them so many different ways. You know, about well, dove could mean this and that.
That's why they don't want you to read it in Greek.
I would take it from like the straightforward reading that it's the cleansing of the temple, meaning like, you know, he's there. Like if we're talking about a zealot Jesus, maybe it's a attempted takeover of the temple, right? Or maybe it's just straightforward that it had been turned into commercial exchange,
Yeah,
and he
depends on
was.
one's interpretation. So yeah, you're absolutely correct, bro.
Yeah, and part of me wonders with the cleansing of the temple, it's always put at the end of the story, and that's why he's killed, supposedly. Or one of the many reasons he's killed, right?
It makes a lot more sense too, though, especially when you read Mark 14 with the young boy running away, being naked when they're trying to arrest Jesus. So that goes into, again, saving the victims of the sex trafficking as well, which there were Greek-speaking Jews as well. There was temple prostitutes back then. Greeks and Romans were going in there. They would have been buying young boys as well. So it explains why Jesus would have been there with a whip cracking a shit, especially if he's an Essene Jew, which would be leaning towards vegetarianism, and they're meant to share the temple. So seeing this as people being blocked from it too, it could be many different reasons, but I would also view that, as being influenced by an Essene movement and not liking what he's seeing. So usually there were even Essenes that were allowed on certain temple days. They would have the temple and then they would leave, and then the normal regular days were owned by the Sadducees and Pharisees, which is still interesting. So you had all these different infighting groups. But
yeah, I've not heard that understanding before. That there was like what do we want to call it? Like prostitution at the temple. I've not heard that, or especially forced. But have you heard of? Are there others that hold to that
Well,
idea?
it could also be a mistranslation as well, because where it says about that word, it's from the word sacred in Hebrew, which also means ones who were raised at the temple because they were considered sacred. They'd be raised off to noble stock, as one could carry the Messiah. That's one reason they were naming their kids after salvation. Like when they were going Yehoshua, which means salvation or God saves whatever. It's not what people think. It's salvation from the Romans. So that was a very zealous community back then as well. So, and Yeshua was more likely being used because around that time they were using shorter variations of the name, which means something very different, which I'm pretty sure just means salvation. But if you use Yehoshua, which means God's salvation or God saves, so different meanings of the words. But it's interesting. We don't really know his name. It's all speculation still, but because it's been translated as all different things. It could be Yeshua, it could be Yeshua, it could be Yehoshua. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here maybe we'll take some time, see anybody that's watching. If you want to put a question, or I know it's full of comments, but if you want to ask specifically something, for us. Oh, here we go. I talked about parallelomania. This is Daniel Hopkins. Parallelophobia. That's another one. I talked about parallelomania. Parallelophobia. Yeah. And here's a guy I haven't seen. Damian. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Cosmic. I think this is about the idea of human trafficking at the temple. Yeah, I've not heard that either. So that
there's
is
a text of Mary the Virgin being raised at the temple until a certain age and then being sold off to Joseph, who was meant to take care of her for so long, or whichever, which could be to a certain age to marry her or to be married to a more nobler stock, because apparently they're both of royal blood, being distant cousins, one being related to Solomon's line and one being related to Nathan's line, or Nathaniel, which is both sons of King David. But temple prostitute was a thing of the ancient past. You can see sacred prostitution. It was very different in Judaism. You couldn't just go into the temple and pay for sex. That's Greeks, in ancient Greek world, but not in the Jewish world. It was raised there for a specific age to be sold off to guarantee it was a virgin. But that was more for the noble ones, or ones who could afford it. A peasant couldn't just do this. And sometimes you would, instead of a sacrifice, I mentioned some children were sacrificed. They just say, bow. Well, Yahweh accepts sacrifices too. Some would donate their children to the temple to be raised there. So offering to God, so that's why they were called sacred, which is Kadesh, I believe, in Hebrew. I have to look that one. I should write it down.
Yeah, I'm not familiar either.
But that's what they would have used that word. But that's mentioned in Kings. I forgot which one. I've got it on the screenshot. But mentions in about the temple prostitutes being kings. Some people call them sodomites, but it's not bloody sodomites. Again, it's just anti people basically mistranslating shit. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was sacred. So they were raising up even boys there to be rabbis, to be learned at the temple. But that's one reason you got temple kids there. Otherwise, why are they there when they're praising Jesus for liberating them? So it makes a lot of sense. So the doves has two different meanings. This is why they tell you don't read it in the original language, because you can translate it differently as well, you know, which is, it's been going on for a long time. They tell you not to read the original Jewish Bible either. You know, they tell you not to read the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, you know, because they don't want you to know that Satan isn't the same concept. You know, it's, they don't want you to ask questions and know too much. That's one reason why it leans towards Gnosticism. You know, a lot of it does. There was Gnosticism in ancient Judaism. There was Gnosis. You know, it's in ancient Greece there was Gnosis. It's argued that there's a continuum of ancient Egyptian knowledge mixed in with Druids and even Hebrew, or ancient Jewish sects mixed in with ancient Greek mystery schools. It's many different theories of it, but no matter what, there's always spiritual knowledge in my eyes. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing, returning back to the you're translating the birds as roosters, right? That the birds will beat you to the sky, right? Or but
roosters don't fly as well, so I see that as
that's
a
where I was
mockery.
going to go. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
as a mock. So
how do you
Jesus
deal
is
with
mocking
that?
them. Yeah, mocking them. So not just mocking them, but symbolic. So it's got different. So dualism, again. So this all points to that. So, like with the concept of two gods as well, dualism. You know, you find dualism in many ancient religions: the good gods, the bad gods, and etc. But yeah, with the roosters being symbolic, it means Christ. It means dying and rising. It's also represented with the leading of a flock. So it's also associated with the divine femme, associated with the serpent dying and rising. It's crazy. So it's definitely very symbolic for that meaning as well. So it's, yeah, but mostly a mockery here as well. It could be birds as well. I just chose to use roosters because the translators thought this must be a mistake. It has to mean birds, but it could very well mean rooster for its symbolic meanings. And also Jesus mocking them, saying, look, the roosters are going to get to heaven before you. It's within you, mate. You know, look within. You know, that's the concept there. It's not out there. It's within you. And then he says it's all around you. So that means being in the present, realizing that it's within you, that it's all around you, that you're one with God, that nothing exists outside the mind of God, outside the mind of the monad, etc. You know?
Yeah. Can you, do you have it on hand, your translation of that?
I have it on my phone. Yeah, I have a PDF. If I used I might have to close down the computer screen if I went on there, but I have it on here. If you want, when you upload this, I'll put my translation in the comment section too, so anyone can download it for free. I didn't just put my translation either. I put the original Greek with it too, because I've seen someone was selling a Nag Hammadi with the Coptic, Greek, and English translations. They were selling for $500. So I got inspired to do this stuff and give it out to people for free. So that was my little good deed.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe this is here, Greek Gospel Thomas. Yeah, I have my translation here too. So I can upload it as well. It's not as long as the other translations because I didn't use any reconstructions of the use of AI. I left that alone. If you couldn't see it by the human eye, I didn't touch it. And I didn't add any Coptic add-ins either. I just left it as how it would have been seen by the human eye. So the Greek fragments themselves. I'll show you what I've added in as well, so you can see little bits. This is the original Greek. Put my phone.
Yeah.
So I've put all of it in there. I also just recently did the Gospel Mary as well, and I put that in there as well. I found little bits of interesting. I could have probably kept it the same translation as well, but I looked at certain words and seen that they meant 3 different things. So I'd choose one, for instance, like where it says in the Son of Man, that could also be the Son of Humanity. It could be the Son of God, etc. So different words could mean certain things. One instance, in the Gospel Mary, I chose to use Son of Man as he was calling himself the Son of Man. So it was known as that, so I chose that. But it could also mean Son of God, etc. Yeah, now I've wrote down a couple of different things. Another thing I noticed as well with the start of the Gospel of Thomas, where it says, where I put down, these are the secret words that came to Jesus the living and were written by Judas twin Thomas. That could be also, which is weird, Judas the twin, or Judas the twin who was known as Thomas, or it could also be Thomas the twin who was known as Judas, or Thomas and Judas, which is very interesting. So I was like, but I chose to use this one here with the thing. But yeah, with the living Jesus, and whoever interprets it will find these words not dying. So it means those who understand the secret meanings of Jesus will become like Jesus themselves. So it's very anti-political. There's even another Greek translation when he talks about fasting from the world. It can also be fasting from the system. it according to another translation, which is very interesting. So the political system, the religious establishment, so fasting from it, those drinking in the drinking trough, but there's nothing there. That means they're gathering up the religious teachings, but they're not taking the spiritual teachings, you know. So it's interesting. It's full of symbolism. That's for sure. That's for sure. It's probably a bit of a text. It has 39 sayings all up, basically, of my translation. Not all of them, because 7 to 25 are missing. So, as I said, I've only done the Greek stuff. Well, I can't read it if you really want me to read it, but take it probably a little bit. It's up to you, or I could just put it on the comments for anyone else to download.
Yeah, if there's a specific logion, like the roosters one that you had mentioned, or any other ones that jump out at you as specifically or how about that one logion?
Here's one. This is a bit different, because you had about the 7 days old, about the child asking about life. My translation came out a little bit different. I chose to use it like this, and I chose to use it more older English to match it more to the old ways of Greek speaking. Says Jesus, a man will not die for a full day. Ask a child for 7 days about the place of life, and you will live. For many are the first last, and last first, and they become eternal. So it's a little bit different to the other one where I said becoming one. So it could be one, it could be eternal. So being the eternal soul. So it doesn't matter about your age. A young person can teach someone older something new. Someone older can teach someone young something new, etc. So we all have something to offer to the world. You know, we have something good to give. And that goodness is within all of us. So stuff like that. So I chose to use certain translations. There was another one I like too. And it says, this is very different as well to the other Greek translation. Says Jesus, you see a nail in the eye of a noble, and it could be brother as well. For you see the dot in his eye. Where do you understand the hypocrisy from your eye? And then you will see the thorn in your brother's eye. So in my eyes, he's talking about not just brothers and all that stuff or your community. He's talking about the religious establishment. So you're seeing their hypocrisy, but you're not seeing the hypocrisy in yourself. So you're judging them, but not yourself. So when you know yourself, you can know them. Basically, the old sayings. So that knowing the goodness within you. And then once you can enact this into your life, then you can see what they're doing is wrong. And maybe you can guide them too. So stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think, isn't that saying is also in the Didache, if I remember right, which maybe I'm not, but and then also in Matthew. So yeah, you wonder if it's not early, right? If you see a lot of which I think the Didache is quite early, but you wonder if that's not an original saying, that that's not something Jesus actually said.
I would lean towards so. Most scholars do lean towards them being the historical sayings of Jesus. A lot of scholars do. It's just there's a few minority which are mostly belonging to Christian orthodoxy, so Catholics, Orthodox, Protestant. That will say it's later. That's because they don't like it. So more of a bias.
Oh, yeah.
I could be biased because I'm favouring it, and so I'm saying it's earlier. But there's a lot of evidence that points towards it. Church fathers mentioning it, and etc. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, some people say that it couldn't be early because it's Gnostic, which maybe it is
older than the Torah. So, and what's his name? Someone that you interviewed, very good Jewish rabbi, Tovia Singer. He's mentioned that as well. That Gnosticism or Gnosis is older than the Torah, which is interesting as well. So it could go back to ancient Egypt. There definitely was. It comes from the Hermetic knowledge of old and stuff. So it's a mixture of philosophy, spiritual thought. So people could even label Plato as Gnostic and stuff, though he wouldn't call it. It's a ridiculous word. It just means someone in the know. Anyone who was calling themselves in the pursuit of spiritual knowledge would be classified as a Gnostic now. So it's a stupid word. As I said, spiritual knowledge has always existed, and anyone that's interpreting spiritual knowledge and looking within themselves is technically a Gnostic. So, but we're all Gnostic and agnostic from time to time. We all know stuff and we all don't know stuff. So.
Yeah, or we're all we're semi-Gnostic or semi-agnostic, right? We're not. I mean, if you were fully Gnostic, you would be
know everything.
Omniscient, is that, or what's knowing everything? Omniscient, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but basically, God itself, really, just beyond everything. It just you'd go insane for sure. our little minds can only take so much, you know. I honestly believe if life got to that point, it would cease to be. It would move on, go into energy or whatever. Everything else is kind of leaning towards science fiction, you know, with that sort of process of thought of how much brain capacity we can reach, what happens if we were using 100% or we reach so much. And it's all science fiction. I don't know.
Yeah. Overclocking your brain, which they say isn't really legit. Like, I've heard, like, you don't only use 10% of your brain because you don't like need to do calculus while you're singing. Let's say, right? Like, you just don't use that. You don't
They
need
said
to.
that's a myth now as well. All sorts. They also say that our brains, all different parts of it, competing with itself to be the most dominant thought. So, yeah, all different theories.
Yeah, absolutely. All right,
Yeah, it's
so
definitely the treasure. That's my view on it, because when the Gnostics, especially the philosophers of ancient Greeks, they would all say the mind is the treasure. You see this in ancient Egypt as well, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so here I'm going through some comments, see if anybody wants to, or anything that anybody wants to run up here. Maybe not quite. All right. And what was the last thing that you said?
I just forgot now. I'll just start reading a little bit of the Gospel of Thomas then. I was trying to find something else. Because I know something else I found that was a bit different. I don't know if it was in here or Mary. I'm pretty sure it was in here. And it's like, I just try to find a text, but something I read about a little bit. It's like, Gods I say to you, and this is my Greek translation, but you don't have what I'm looking for. So it's a bit different when he says about with the gods and stuff. So in my ideas, that's saying that you are gods, but you're not comprehending what I'm saying to you. So it's a very different translation, which is awesome, because I chose to use certain words because they could be dualistic in their meanings. Everything's dualism, you know, in a sense. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the part in John where they say, you being a human make yourself out to be a god. And then he says, which is, I've always been like, what is he talking about? Where he responds, well, isn't it written in your law, anyone to whom the word of God came is a god?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
It's
I
God
don't
and
think that's in the
Psalms as
law.
well.
Yeah.
I found the text too. I'll read it quickly as well for you. It's got, says Jesus, many times have you wished to hear these words. Gods, I say to you, and you don't have what I am asking you. Days will come when you will seek me and you will not find me. So being, you wish to hear these words and stuff. So meaning that he's the only one that's speaking of this stuff during his time. That's what makes his teachings unique. You're not going to see it from anyone else because he's the only one around his village or going around saying this stuff. And again, with you being like gods and God being within you, nothing existing outside the mind of God. So we're all emanations of God coming to know itself, basically, as well. Similar to with Carl Jung, with the universe experiencing itself. But yeah, and with this days you'll seek me and not find me. So in other words, if you're doing shitty things, you're not going to find the Christ within you as his goodness. So it's the concept of good fruit and rotten fruit. So the good fruit's your good deeds, the good you, and the rotten fruit is the bad deeds. You have nothing good to offer. You know, so all symbolism. Yeah. And that's my reason they question him, why are you speaking in parables? Because that stuff was dangerous to speak about, could have got you killed. It shows that these texts weren't meant to be owned by the masses for this reason, you know, and those who had a deeper understanding of it was a threat to the religious establishment that want to control it all, you know, because they were making lots of money, especially during the times of the temple of what they were running, you know, selling off, doing money lending, so charging interest. And so really were thieves. They were charging high amounts, you know. Concept of money is different now. You know, a few gold coins back then is probably worth thousands of dollars now. You know, it's like in the Wild Western times, $200. That was worth like $4,000 now in our money or whatever. Bit more here in Australia, 4,000 in your currency. It's probably like 8,000 here. You know, so it's like baffling. So even the holy oil that Jesus said, rub on all this on those who are sick, he took that from the temple, I reckon, when they said not to allow anyone to take anything from the temple courtyards. But I reckon that's where he got the oil from. He could have bought it, who knows, given it to him, who knows. But there's 2 recipes of that. One of them contains cannabosum, which is Hebrew for cannabis, 6 pounds of it. So that would have been so expensive, especially with frankincense, myrrh, olive oil, and cinnamon. So expensive back then. And if that was used as medicine, that was charged top top dollar by the Pharisees and Sadducees. So every now and then they would anoint a few people or something like that. You'd have to wait till for those events. You have to pay for it, very expensive. So imagine a jar that would have cost you a price of a horse, So he's gone around giving this to people for free. So it shows that he's clicked on. He knows what was in it. If he's telling them rub this on anyone that's sick, that's powerful shit. So yeah, there's tons of drugs mentioned in the Bible and stuff, and there's a lot of people that believe that a lot of these miracles were done by these narcotics that he would carry. The Jews, ancient Jews, Canaanites as well, they would inhale cannabosum in their temples along with frankincense and myrrh to receive their divine visions from God. But they were also throwing stones in the air, asking God questions as well for yes and no. Thummim and Thurim stones, whatever you call them, which the Mormons sort of carry on one of their traditions. Not like that, though, but they mention it. But yeah, that's what they were doing with them. And they don't know when that practice stopped. That's similar to the shake a ball and ask a question, yes or no. People were getting judged for that, for life and death sentences. So that's crazy. Your life was in a pair of stones, So, yeah, you see why Jesus would have been intelligent, saying, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" Basically, he's going out there with a whip, cracking them, especially if they're selling children, like to raise them up in the temple. He most likely didn't like that. And if it's true that his mother came from those temples and they did the same thing, that also explains a lot. So it's crazy. It's one's own interpretation, how they're going to read the text, what it means. It's dualism.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that with the story about Jesus just kind of appearing in the temple as a child, right?
Yeah.
Teaching in the temple.
Hmm.
What that is getting at. But
it's very interesting. So it shows that it's a bit different compared to then, because he's going there visiting the temple. But back then, around this time, they're raising him there as well. So it's definitely got a large Canaanite influence as well, And even the Bible passages you find very anti-Canaanite writings because they're trying to separate themselves from the Canaanites, which was their ancestor religion. They're basically the same people, just passed on, divided by religion, And they themselves had different gods. Some worshipped El, some worshipped Yahweh, some worshipped El and Yahweh and Asherah, some worshipped Baal, etc. Some replaced El with Baal, some replaced El with Yahweh. And then ultimately Yahweh got merged with El because he was just too violent. And the Jews weren't able to win every battle. They got their asses kicked too, So they had to mix a peaceful concept with the others. It was just too barbaric.
Yeah.
So that was how it was. People didn't want to have just barbaric gods. They wanted to have peaceful and loving as well. But that being said, a lot of times they were praying for their gods not only to give them good luck, but to not be a dick to them. So please don't pick on me, It's crazy, They feared them. And that whole concept of fear, some people reckon that someone out in the Stone Age come up with the concept and said that if you don't do what I say, you're going to be punished, This earthquake was caused by my God. Who bloody knows, But I don't really believe that. I believe it came out of the women that were growing hemp. And because it was one of the first cultivated plants, I believe it came out of the goddess worship. And from there, dived into religion. The mixture of that and spirit guides, which I believe became gods. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha. All right. And let's see here. Let's see, it doesn't look like we have any burning messages in the chat here. Let's see. All right. So yeah, very good. Yeah, any other thoughts that we didn't cover on the Gospel of Thomas in your translation of it?
Pretty cool with what I've done as well. Actually, there's one here that I didn't have in this translation because I didn't add in every single text because I left the Coptic add-ins alone, and I also left one that's been added in by the use of AI, so the reconstructions. This is saying 108. I said it's not in my text. It goes, whoever knows the father and the mother will be called the child of a whore. So that's interesting as well, where you got the concept of Sophia being the mother, the virgin, the whore. You even have this aspect of Barbello as well. So the aspect of the masculine and femme of God. So masculine and feminine nature. So being androgynous beyond sex, which is also interesting. Another concept with Sophia being the whore. With Mary, she was raised at the temple. So she's a virgin. She's the whore, etc. The mother, the one that's sacred, So she's raised at the temple as a virgin to be sold off, basically. So it explains a lot of wrath there with Jesus, you know. So it was happening at those times. They were selling young girls at the temple, you know. And later on, some time, they would even take on young boys to raise them up as rabbis, so that way they can groom the next lot of children, you know. And that's what was going on with the rabbis that would go out in the fields and teach people, you know. Many of their followers were children, teenagers. There's theories that Jesus' followers were teenage boys, maybe older. We don't really know, which is so much we don't know. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, let's maybe we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, any final thoughts that you had before we head out?
I enjoyed this chat. I thought it was great. Loved it. We have to do this again.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for watching, and check out Nathan's channel, Spiritual Level of Being.
I'll also put in the comments when it gets uploaded, I'll chuck in the PDF file of my translation with the original Greek.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks so much.
Many blessings, Elliot, and many blessings to the audience. Peace and love.